Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to get a virtual firewall pfSense deployed, and the main purposes of doing this will be to have some clear segmentation between what we can call the internet network, which is basically where my host and the vSender and so on is right now, and get a real production network that's only hosting the lab stuff, as well as getting a DR side network that's running in a different IP subnet. Now, previously I showed you how to create a content library, how to import an ISO file, so I've already downloaded pfSense, which we'll be using in this video, and imported it into the content library. Before we start the process of deploying the virtual machine with pfSense, we want to get to the host to actually have some networking set up. So I'm going to click on host, configure, go down to virtual switches, and here we have this management network, VM network, where the virtual machines are living today. And what we want to do is actually add in an additional standard switch. So click next, new switch, next. And you would think we would want to add some additional adapters here. I'm not going to do that. This is also going to prompt a bit of a warning here. No active physical network adapters. So of course, VMware is saying basically here, you don't have any way of getting in and out of this virtual switch. That's okay. It doesn't know that we'll be deploying a virtual firewall that will be basically the default gateway inside this new network. And it'll also have a connection to the current, should we say, internet network. So we'll click OK. What should we call it? We will basically just call it production. Next, finish. So that's a new switch right down here. Then we'll click add networking again. We'll do the same thing one more time. Next, okay. And then we'll basically just call this DR. Could also call it disaster recovery if you wanted to type it all the way out. Next, finish. And then in just a second or two, it should be right here. So we're good to go. Now the next step, of course, is to get this virtual machine up and running. So we'll say create new virtual machine. Next. What should we call it? We could call it pfSense, you could call it firewall, you could call it router, that's all up to you. I think I'll just call it firewall here. We're placing it inside the production data center. Here we have our cluster, there's only one host inside, so I'll select that. Next, put it on my only data store here. Next, pick the latest compatibility because why not? Next. Now the operating system, what is pfSense really running? Well, here I've opened up the pfSense release site. The latest one on the list is 2.5x, which would be pfSense 12, but this is not released yet. So what I downloaded was actually 2.4.5, and we can see here this is pfSense version, FreeBSD version 11. So we need to go to not Windows or Linux, but other. And then find FreeBSD 11, and I downloaded the 64-bit. Next. One CPU should be sufficient here. Memory-wise, the default here is 1 GB. That would probably work great. If you're a little bit frugal, because you don't have so much memory, you could change this to, let's say, 512. I think that will work just fine. Disk space-wise, I think the 8 GB is not a bad choice. Now, SCSI controller-wise, normally I would change this to VMware Paravirtual or so-called pvSCSI, but the FreeBSD version we are running here doesn't come with pvSCSI out of the box. So if we were to do this, I could launch up the installer and so on, but it would then not be able to see this 8 GB disk. So I'll have to leave this as LSI Logic SAS. Networking-wise, we want this to be on the VM network. We can also rename this later on to something more meaningful, but that was just one NIC, and we also want to confirm this is VMXNet 3. So the next thing we want to do here is actually add in multiple additional network adapters. So number 2, I want that to be on the production network, and the last third one will be the disaster recovery network. So what else do we have? CD, DVD drive. Let's pick from the content library, pfSense 2.4.5. Okay. Now notice this little thing here, connected power on. Yeah, we definitely want that. So it will be connected. We can use it and boot from it and so on. and I don't have any more settings. So let's click next, finish. And that should give us our firewall VM here. Okay, let's power it on. Close this tab up here. This also lets us open up the web console. And you see it's already in progress with the boot. Shouldn't take too much time. Okay, links are coming up. All right, accept. I might have to click inside the window. Okay, we want to do an install. I'll pick the default key map. Could use UFS or ZFS. I'll just go with UFS as the default here. Okay, we see that it actually is already starting the whole install. And I think this is not going to take too much time, but let's pause and then we'll come back once the install is done. So we see the installer is finally done here. And honestly, I don't have any specific modifications that I want to do. So I'll say no and reboot. Now the thing here is, of course, that it's been booting from the content library ISO file so far. So what we'll go and do here is actually set that to client device, go back and press send control or delete just to make sure it really is booting from the hard disk before we start doing anything. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that it will be pulling an IP address from my local network that my laptop is on, but this is going to be the WAN, or should I say internet interface of the firewall here. And then of course we'll have some internal networks, and we'll go and define these right now. If you have switches that support VLANs, you could be using that. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible here, so I'm actually going to say no. So the WAN interface should be the first network adapter network interface that we set up. This will be VMXNet adapter 1, or in this case it's actually called 0. So the next one will be the real production network. It's going to be VMX1, and then the optional interface here will be VMXNet 2. This is also what we called disaster recovery. So WAN VMX0, LAN VMX1, and OPT1 VMX2. Okay, get that set up. So now it's going to go down and pull an IP address. Okay, perfect. Getting all of it set up. And then in just a little bit, we should be able to go and manage it. Just need these services to start up. Now the problem here is going to be that I probably won't be able to reach the management interface of the firewall because I'm sitting on the WAN side. Now that makes perfect sense, and we see the IP address is .183, so we can try and manage that. That's going to be HTTPS 1.183, and this is not working as expected. So what we'll do here is we'll go to the shell, and then we can try first of all to have a rule here and see if that will work. Probably not. And the main issue here is that I'm on the WAN side, but also that's a private network. So I think what we'll do first is just disable packet filtering. And this will hopefully let me get to the main interface. Could take a bit. Okay, so now we're able to proceed. The default username here is going to be admin and just pfSense, pfSense, like we see up here, all lowercase. Sign in. And no. So what could be a good idea here? We could, of course, click through the wizard here. Yeah, some support, host name. Actually, don't really want to change anything right now. Time source, that's a good idea. WAN interface DHCP, that's also great. We can go down here. Now, this is important. Block, private network. Nope, we don't want to do that. In a production environment, you would want to do this, but we're not looking to do this right now. LAN interface, I'm going to make this into 2, and that's because my local network that I'm using as my WAN inside is already on the 1.network, so we'll make this into 2. Admin password, I'm going to change this to the same one that I'm using everywhere else, so I don't have to keep track of all of these default passwords and so on. Nope. And then we can go and reload. Now, this is probably not a bad thing, but I suspect we'll lose connectivity here as a part of this process, because once again I'm sitting on the WAN side of this. So we can go over here and yeah, we see not really anything is happening. So let's go and run the same command again to make sure that the filtering is really disabled. Now I can't see where is it in the process right now, so it could basically be that it's still working on the process, applying the changes that I've asked it to make and so on. So we may sometimes have to run this command more than once just to get it to a working state. Okay, so now it seemed like it got up, we accepted that. So one of the things we of course want to do is to make sure we can actually get to this WAN interface without having to go and disable the packet inspection here. So let's go to rules. We see we don't have any rules, but it also means all incoming connections will be blocked. So let's make a rule, a pass rule. Let's say it's coming in on WAN, IPv4, TCP, from where could be any. You could also say a network and then apply the network that you're in. Now this is again a lab, so I'm just going to apply it from anywhere. Where are we sending this destination? Well, that would be the firewall itself. Yeah, and what are we allowing? It should be HTTPS to get to the WAN interface. And we can put some description here. Allow web GUI from WAN interface. Save. Apply, and it says here it's been applied successfully. So let's try and see if we can browse around. Hopefully yes, but we see the rules are reloading in the background, so of course it has to actually load this rule before we can do something. Could also be the rule is insufficient potentially. No, seems like it's actually working. So this is of course good. Now just to really make sure, let's try and click on something. Yeah, it seems to work. Now you might be thinking, well, you did the command over there with the -d. So that was for disabling it. -e is for enabling it, but we can see it's already enabled. So at this point in time, everything seems to be good. So we could go to LAN here, sorry. Let's rename this to be production. So it has the same name as the network we gave it in vSphere. We can confirm the network here, save that, click apply. And then once this is done, we can actually see the name is already up here. Then we can go and get the OPT interface set up. And you could call this DR, you could call it disaster recovery. I'm just going to call it disaster recovery here. And what should we do? We should make it IPv4 static. Give it an IP address 192.3.1, and that's because I want it to be a separate subnet. So when I do recoveries to my DR side, it will be a different subnet. Give me more opportunities to learn. And we'll pick /24, so it's a subnet. We don't want to block any of this. Save. Apply again. Let's see here how we're doing. Okay, so far so good. Notice it actually cleared off the space, so that's okay. Also make sure we have some names here that are very easy to understand. Now basically there's not so much more we have to do, but what about the rules? So let's see here, we have some different rules. So we have WAN, production, which is allowing some management here, and we say we're allowing LAN to any. Okay, what about disaster recovery? It doesn't have any rules. So if you want to allow traffic to this later on, we would need to do something here. So let's say source any to any, and we can say any port, and then save, apply. Right, so now traffic can actually come out and in, of course. And we have something here as well, source. We could set up a little bit of a rule here as well on the production network that will just keep things quite simple. So any, and once again we could say any. Okay, and this is LAN to any, but say apply as well. Okay, there we go. And of course we could clean up just a little bit by deleting these rules here. So let's say delete. Okay, so now we've definitely simplified everything as much as we can. Again, this is not the recommended guide here, of course, for your production environment, but rather for the home labs that we're trying to get built here. Now, before we get to the end of this video, there might be one thing that you're thinking of at this point. Okay, so I can get to the management interface of this, but how am I going to get inside of this network, or should I say these networks, to production and disaster recovery? Good question, because if we try to reach, let's say, the optional DR side interface here, we'll see that this is not really functional. And of course, this is because right now my computer is going to my local 1.1 gateway, and it doesn't know how to get to this network here. So what we need to do is get a route set up for that. Now, when you run a command prompt like this, you have a command called route that we can use for this. Now, the little issue with the route command is that it's great, but it requires elevation. So you really want to make sure that you run it as administrator. So if it doesn't say administrator up here, probably you will have some issues. So make sure that it's running as administrator. Okay, now if you forgot, let's go and take a look at the assignments here. So we had some different networks, and what I'm looking to do here, of course, is to get from the, should we say, WAN side into these other networks. So what we'll do is say we'll route add and 192.168.2.0. That's the production network. Then we have to do a mask, I think, here, 255.255.250. And how do we get there? Well, you have to specify the IP address. Right now, this is DHCP, which is all good, but you would probably want to make sure that this is set as a static IP address so it doesn't suddenly change, because then these commands are not going to work anymore. The alternative is, of course, to go to your local firewall and set up a static route instead of doing this from your local computer here, but that's a little bit out of the scope here. So the machine to reach this network would be, in this example here, 183. And then, of course, we had the DR site, so that will be exactly the same. Okay, great. So if I now try to go here, say 3.1, you can see it actually now works. So this is a critical part for getting all of this up and running. Now, before we go, there's one more thing that's important we get to check. Let's take a look at the firewall rules here, because it's quite easy to make some mistakes here. So if we start by going to disaster recovery, notice here I actually selected TCP earlier. So TCP traffic could flow right now, but we probably want everything to flow. So you really want to make sure that this is set to any, so you don't run into some funky issues here. Now let's go to production as well. You see it's the same. Let's get this fixed as well. Set it to any, go down to save, and let's go to WAN. Well, here right now, that should be all fine, but you know what, and on top of this, because right now we're just allowing HTTPS traffic, so we could also, just for fun, of course, go and make a little rule here, for example, to say that, let's see here, pass WAN IP phones, let's say, we add ICMP traffic, just to take an example from any to any, allow ICMP ping on WAN, save. Okay, so let's open all of that up, do a little command prompt here, say ping 192.2.1, for example, 3.1, and we had the main IP, of course, was 1.183. So that all looks good. So the only little issue right now is that we can get traffic from basically anywhere to, well, from production to anywhere, from disaster recovery to anywhere, but we are sitting on this WAN connection. Obviously, we don't want anything going in from there, but in this example of what we're doing here, we do want to allow that traffic from my management machine here. It could also be that you normally would not want to do that, of course, but in the example here, we do want to do that. So we go to WAN interface, IP version 4, protocol would be any, from anywhere to anywhere. You could also limit this to just your computer, but this is okay. So we'll basically allow traffic from main into home lab, save and apply. And then that's basically it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, please do that, and don't forget to give this video a like.